My name is Miguel Silva. My article is titled Habitat Fragmentation and Effects of Herbivore Abundances on Bird Species Richness. So earlier studies have addressed the consequences of habitat fragmentation, but only focusing on direct impacts of that area reduction. The indirect effects caused by ecological imbalances and trophic cascades has remained unstudied. Habitat fragmentation in isolation, though, has been found to alter the densities of mammalian herbivores. These herbivores influence the growth of plants through stimulating their growth by either compensation and nutrient cycling. This brings a potential for mammalian communities that persist in these fragments to have indirect effects on other animal groups. Their objectives were to link the indirect effect of the change in these mammal-herbivore communities on bird communities in tropical dry forests. To do this, they investigated the effects in several isolated land bridge islands located in Lake Guri, Venezuela, which supported red howler monkey populations at densities that were 20 to 40 times greater than observed on the mainland. Their hypothesis was that increased productivity propagates through the food web to affect other members of the faunal community. To test this, they saw the relationship between howler monkeys and resident interior birds nesting in a sample of islands in Lake Guri. They analyzed this relationship between tree growth rates and the bird species richness to then indirectly determine the effect of howler monkeys on that bird species richness. The study site was Lake Guri, which is a hydroelectric reservoir in east central Venezuela. It contains a large number of islands because of the flooding that range from small to large, and they're isolated by as much as 12 kilometers from the mainland. They studied 29 islands that are small, and these were all semi-decidual tropical dry forests. They did spot map censuses from May through August on the 29 islands and only counted forest interior birds and not shorebirds or birds with multiple island ranges. It was also necessary to account for differences in species richness caused by the passive sampling effect, which refers to the tendency for larger islands to have more bird species than smaller ones. Then they predicted the number of nesting pairs on an island and the species richness of each island through a model, and then calculated the residual bird species richness, which was that observed minus the predicted species. And then they compared that to howler monkey density. Then they calculated the annual woody increment, which is an indicator of above ground productivity in forested ecosystems. It was only calculated in 9 islands, though, through change in stem diameter and basal area. They used a linear least square regression to analyze the relationship between this AWI and the bird species richness. Finally, they tested if the relationship between howler monkeys and birds is mediated through changes in the plant productivity. So they used plant path analysis to determine this indirect effect through the relationships shown here. For their results, their census totaled 341 different breeding pairs, or 31 distinct bird species. The passive sampling only counted for 34% of that variation. The mean residual bird species richness was 0.28 plus minus 5.51 species and had a significant negative correlation with the island area, but there was a significant positive correlation with the density of howler monkeys. The annual woody increment averaged 0.16 meters squared per hectare and significantly increased with the amount of howler monkey density. And then it also had a significant positive effect on the bird species richness. According to the path analysis they did, the indirect effect of howler monkey density on the bird species richness is 32%. So studies have found that the diversity of birds in fragments tends to decrease with the area. This may be due in part to the passive sampling. In Lake Guri, they were found that they do decrease with the island area, but they also increase in relation to the density of howler monkeys. This increased abundance of generalist herbivores in fragments is not only restricted to howler monkeys. Other islands were found to have hyperabundant iguanas and leafcutter ants. They predicted that the increase of these tree growth rates caused by the dense populations of howler monkeys should positively affect the number of bird species, and they found this to be true. However, they were only able to analyze the indirect effect between howler monkeys and birds from that small subset of 9 islands from which the AWI information was available. They did also state that relationship between howler monkeys and birds may not be casual, but just due to similar habitat preferences. However, the distribution of howler monkeys has been primarily determined by island isolation, while the birds are more mobile and are not attached to that. The impacts of diversity on abundance of herbivores, both directly and indirectly, may play important roles in determining the diversity of faunal communities in forest fragments.